The great civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. once called 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning the most segregated hour in Christian America. And in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he called out moderate whites who were more devoted to order than to justice. On this episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lainey Eugene, Mr. Karl Weber, Episcopal lay leader and racial justice activist, leads us in a conversation about the need for churches and church members to take not only a moral stance against racial injustice, but to be active in calling it out and agitating for change. This episode originally aired September 8th, 2021.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. Remember, at Race Talk Revolution, your voice matters. Our topic this afternoon is repairing racial justice. And our speaker is Mr. Karl Weber of Rivertowns Episcopal Parishes Action on Inclusion and Race. Now, you may remember Karl as a member of that wonderful interfaith panel discussion we brought you earlier this year. So we are pleased to have him with us again today, joining in his solo appearance. As always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. When we get to the Q&A section, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand. Also, as a gentle reminder, as we do every week, Race Talk Revolution is a loving, respectful, inclusive platform designed to encourage constructive dialogue around tough issues pertaining to racial and social injustice. Race Talk Revolution is a safe space and a brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions, to explore the nuances of systemic racism, and together we grow our anti-racism muscles. In our Race Talk Revolution community, we practice radically inclusive love. Radically inclusive love. Even when we don't understand or agree with what's being shared, we listen with respect, we listen with appreciation and empathy. Our commitment is that every person be encouraged, every person be heard, and every person be appreciated. Because on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. Now here's my beautiful co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb.
And I bid you all a good morning, good afternoon. And we are so pleased to have with us this afternoon again, as we say, Mr. Karl Weber, who is a writer and an editor who specializes in topics related to politics, business, and social issues. He has co-authored 3 books with Muhammad Yunus, who is the founder of Birmingham Bank and winner of the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize, including the New York Times bestseller, Creating a World Without Poverty. Other authors that he has worked with include President Jimmy Carter, sustainability guru Andrew W. Savitz, White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, Governor of Michigan Jennifer Granholm, and Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. How's that for some name dropping? Raised in no faith, Karl was baptized as an Episcopalian in his 20s, and since then he has worshiped at several Episcopal churches in the New York area, serving on the vestries of 3 of them. In 2015, he helped to found Rivertowns Episcopal Parishes Action on Inclusion and Race, which is known as REPAIR, an organization sponsored by 5 churches in Westchester County that is dedicated to racial justice. Karl continues to serve on the organizing committee of REPAIR, which holds monthly educational programs that attract between 30 and 100 participants of all backgrounds. He lives in Irvington, New York with his wife, Mary Jo, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. They have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Karl, thanks so much for joining us again today. We're so pleased to have you back.
Lane, thank you so much for having me back. And Eugene, you know, when you were reading your description of Race Talk Revolution, I said, wow, no wonder I feel at home here, because the values that you uphold and that you're trying to create through creating a safe space where honest dialogue can occur and where, as you put it, radically inclusive love can take place, where people can learn to understand and respect one another, even when they don't always disagree. Those are all the same things that we try to do in REPAIR. So you folks are on the same wavelength as us. We're on the same kind of journey, walking parallel paths, and it's so great to be able to compare notes with you.
Great, great. Thank you
you
so
for
much.
coming. So yes,
Just
so the last time you were, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eugene.
just real fast, I just happened to see in this window. I want to just say hello to Culture Coffee too. That's all.
Indeed. Hello, everyone.
And hello, everyone.
And welcome to all of our newcomers, because we do have some folks here for the first time today, which is absolutely wonderful. Thank you for being here. So, Karl, the last time you were here as a member of an interfaith panel to discuss the responsibility that falls on religious leaders to dismantle systemic racism. And today, you're going to focus on repair and the work that your organization is doing to bring people together for that purpose in your home county of Westchester, New York. So can you just start by telling us a little bit about the history of repair? What was your inspiration?
Well, 2015 was the year when Repair was born, and we didn't intentionally set out to create an anti-racism organization. What happened was, so within the Episcopal Church, like many mainstream Protestant denominations, every year during the period prior to Easter, many churches will have an educational program of some sort to help people sort of prepare for the holiest week of the year. And that was a time when, it may sound painfully familiar, but when the United States was going through a period of racial disharmony. There were, terrible deaths at the hands of police officers. And it was just a reminder of the fact that people of color continued to be treated unfairly and to have their rights trampled in our country. And so many people, including people in our Episcopal churches, were deeply upset and realizing, for Pete's sake, we have to do something about this now. This was such a widespread message that when the leaders of 5 churches in Westchester County were talking about what kind of educational program are you going to do leading up to Easter this year, they all agreed we need to start delving into the issue of race, which we've kind of tiptoed around or talked platitudes about for too long. So they said, let's start a program. We'll call it a Lenten Conversations About Race, because Lent is that period prior to Easter. And one day, the rector of the Church of St. Barnabas in Irvington, where Mary Jo and I worship, one day she had an appointment that she had to go to at a time when she and 4 other priests were getting together to talk about their Lenten Conversations About Race program. So she called me up and said, Karl, by any chance are you free to take my place in this meeting? So I said, yes, sounds interesting. I'd like to join in. And it turned into kind of a life-changing moment for me. I was, as far as I knew, I was just agreeing to take her place for a 1-hour meeting, but it turned into what has become a years-long commitment. Because the Lenten Conversations About Race that we set up during that season in 2015 proved to be tremendously important for many of us who attended. It was sponsored by 5 Episcopal churches in all in Westchester County. One is my own Church of St. Barnabas in Irvington. There's All Saints Church in Briarcliff Manor, Christ Church in Tarrytown, and 2 churches in Ossining. And these churches are quite diverse racially and economically. For example, St. Barnabas is almost all white. We live in a town that I think the white population is something like 97%. Briarcliff Manor, very similar. Whereas Ossining and Tarrytown are much more diverse, many more people of color, Latinx people as well. And so bringing these 5 churches together to talk together about race and inviting all of our parishioners to attend these sessions every week during Lent turned out to be an amazing opportunity, because for some of us, it was the first time that we had really open conversations with people of different backgrounds about these issues that are so fraught. And we brought in some experts to share information with us. We read essays and readings that opened many of our eyes to thinking about things in new ways. And we even did some activities that were tremendously eye-opening. Many of you may have, for example, participated in something called the Privilege Walk, which is where a leader gets up in the front of the room, everybody stands in a row, and the leader reads aloud a series of statements. and says, well, if you agree with this statement, step forward. If you don't, step back. So a statement might be something like, I knew from an early age that I would be able to go to college. If you agree with that, step forward. If not, step back. When I go into a store, I never feel as though the store owner or the security guard has their eye on me. If you agree with that, step forward. If not, step back. By the time we went through this privilege walk at one of our first meetings, the results were fairly amazing, although many of you can probably anticipate what they were. There was a row of white people standing in the front of the room and a row of black people standing in the back of the room. And actually, I was kind of in the middle of the room because I'm half white, half Asian. And some of the things that were read aloud that represented privilege were things I had experienced, but some were not. My wife happens to be Hispanic, Latinx. She also was in the middle of the room with me, which maybe is one of the reasons why our marriage has lasted so long. We kind of understand where we're both coming from. But it was eye-opening because this was a room full of folks, many of them affluent white folks who probably prior to that would have said, white privilege? Oh, I'm not a privileged person. I worked hard for everything I got. But by the end of that exercise, a lot of eyes had been opened. So we had 5 weeks of these Lenten conversations about race, and they were so interesting and so formative for us that when the season of Lent ended, we were ready for Easter, a group of us got together and said, this has been really good. Let's not stop. Let's keep this going. And that is how Repair was born. And we've continued to meet every month since then, except we do take the summer off most times. And we've had a variety of different kinds of activities and exercises and learning experiences, brought in all kinds of amazing experts to teach us, and engaged in lots of activities that we've learned from and that have enabled us to learn from one another. And it has been really an important shaping experience for me, and I think for many of the other people who are supporters and participants of Repair. So long answer to a short, simple question, Lane.
No, that's all good. We want to know about the organization. I'm curious about, so since then, what are some of the things that you have accomplished, and do you have particular goals? Is the goal to have change within the community in terms of the church community, or is the goal to take it out into the community and to actually create some activities that help to dismantle systemic racism? And before you answer that question, someone asked, what does the acronym Repair stand for?
Sure.
Again, yes, go ahead.
I can repeat it again. It's Rivertowns, because the churches that founded Repair are all located along the Hudson River in what's often called the Rivertowns. So we're very proud of that. It's a beautiful part of the country. So it's Rivertowns Episcopal Parishes Action on Inclusion and Race Repair. So, and of course, for our Jewish brothers and sisters, we're kind of stealing a little bit of their thunder, because we're very much inspired by the Jewish concept of tikkun, repairing the world, which is a mission that progressive Jewish people have taken on for generations, that we progressive Christians like to feel that we should adopt as well. So the fact that the acronym is Repair, has certainly more than one meaning. But in terms of your question about our goals, well, so it's very interesting. I think our goals continue to evolve, and I think we have certain goals that all of us who participate in Repair would agree on, and probably others that vary from one person to another. I think clearly our main goal is to provide that safe space for sharing and for learning from one another, for deepening our own personal knowledge of what racism is, how it works, how it infects all of us and our society, and to find things that we as individuals can do to help fight against it, and as you say, to help to dismantle it. Now, we're also part of organizations such as our parish churches, and of course, we're also all citizens and participants in our society in many other ways, as voters, as consumers, as employees of businesses, as teachers or students, as parents, members of families. And so one of the things that we also talk about quite a bit is what we can do in all of those roles to play that part of dismantling racism, or helping to do that. The leaders of Repair, we have our organizing committee of 13, 14 people who are the priests who are in charge of our churches are all part of that organizing committee, but we also have a group of lay people, lay leaders like myself, who are part of that organizing committee. So we're folks who have a certain amount of influence within our parishes. On the other hand, a parish is a community. Let's talk about the Church of St. Barnabas. We probably have 100, 150 people who consider themselves members of the St. Barnabas community. Some have been attending for many, many years, or for even generations, others just for a few years. And so what St. Barnabas as a parish does and how it behaves in relation to racial issues is not up to just me, or not even just me and Gareth Evans, who's our rector, who's a member of the Repair Organizing Committee and a very strong supporter of Repair. Instead, it's a matter of moving 150 people down the right path, many of whom are, deeply engaged in this anti-racism work and care about it a lot and are really working hard. And then others probably who may have kept at arm's length from it up to this point. Maybe for whatever political, social, personal reasons, they may think, oh, I don't necessarily have to be involved in that. That's not really my thing. I'm involved with my family, my work, whatever it may be. Kind of just like, people you would meet in any community. So you'll have that kind of spectrum. One of the things that we certainly try to do in Repair is bring this important message about racism and the need to dismantle it to everybody in our parishes. That's our most immediate community. And so we talk about that a lot. Whenever Repair is meeting, we get up in the church service, talk about what we're doing at the meeting, who's going to be coming to speak about it, what the topic is, and it becomes a focus of conversation throughout the parish. And I think definitely we're having an impact on the overall attitudes of folks. Have we brought everybody along, and have we made each of our parishes into a model of anti-racist strength? Probably not, but I think we are moving in the right direction. And I think something similar could be said about the impact that we're having in our communities. Of course, a lot has happened in the world in the last couple of years. We all know that racial justice thankfully has moved up the ladder of awareness for so many Americans. And so we see positive things happening in the Westchester Rivertowns. And I like to think that Repair is playing at least a small role in helping to move those things along. But obviously, it's also driven by forces that are much larger than us. So I'll just give one quick example. I mentioned that my hometown of Irvington is 90+% white, and we have our fair share of folks who would call themselves politically conservative, and who I might think need some education when it comes to racial issues. And so it was quite a remarkable event last year in 2020 when we held our first Juneteenth celebration in Irvington, driven actually by a member of St. Barnabas Church, someone who has attended some Repair meetings and who is also a deeply committed racial activist. She pulled together a tremendous event with a band and with speakers and with display booths, and folks from all over Westchester of all races came to celebrate Juneteenth with us in Irvington. We did the same thing again this year and had an even bigger crowd, an even bigger turnout. And it was really fun to have folks like Andrea Stewart Cousins, who's a very important member of our New York State legislature and who represents Irvington, come give a little talk at our Juneteenth celebration, say, Well, I tell you, I never imagined that there was going to be a Juneteenth celebration in Irvington, New York, of all places. Congratulations, Irvington. So when I see things like that happen, I feel as though, again, maybe Repair is playing a small part in helping to encourage things like that to happen. And having a celebration is one thing. Dismantling racism, of course, is another much bigger job. But all these little pieces, moving people's minds, can help to lay the foundation for that dismantling that needs to happen, and which, of course, is a much bigger job.
Yeah, well, I'd like to actually ask you about that, because I know that your stance is that religious communities need to step forward in terms of these conversations and actually taking action against racism. And I wanted to ask you, what have been some of the challenges that you've experienced? Maybe, the resistance that you've experienced is one question. And the next question is, what do you think people are looking for right now? Has anybody shared that information with you, what they're looking for in terms of support?
Right. Well, so it's tremendously interesting. I mean, Repair, of course, is a multiracial organization. The folks who attend, I should say, are not all Episcopalians. They're not all Christians, especially now in the era of Zoom, when we're holding our meetings virtually. Folks turn up on Zoom from all kinds of backgrounds. We have a lot of wonderful Jewish participants, Unitarians, atheists, I'm sure, people of all kinds of backgrounds. We begin and end the programs with prayer, because we're very clear about the fact that we're motivated by a Christian vision of inclusion and universal love and universal justice. So that's where we who organized Repair are coming from. But of course, that's a vision that many people can support, whether they consider themselves Christians or members of any other faith. In terms of resistance, or the kind of the role of the church, the thing about Repair, because it's multiracial and it comes out of these different churches, people are coming to Repair who need and want different things. We have a lot of white members, like many of the folks that I see in this gathering today. And, I would include people like myself in there, although, as I say, I'm technically only half white, for whom getting past racism is partly a matter of self-education, of self-work, of digging deep into myself to understand exactly where the remnants of racial bias and the assumption of privilege that I was raised with, exactly where those things are still lingering in me and still causing me to make stupid decisions and sometimes say and do stupid things. So there's that. There's education about myself. Just as I need to work on being a better father and husband. I need to work on being anti-racist. So Repair certainly helps me and helps many of our white members to do that. We also talk a lot about the racial structures in our society. We've had experts come and talk with us about housing discrimination, about voting rights, about the criminal justice system. So we've become educated as to be, for example, better voters. And the folks who regularly attend Repair, I'm sure, will all tell you that they have become politically more active in supporting progressive groups, which are working to turn around those forms of racial bias within the community. Repair, as an organization, doesn't promote those activities. Although in our meetings we will share, here's a petition that's going around that you might want to sign. Here's a meeting that you might want to attend. Here's a demonstration that's taking place next week. Here's some information, and many of our members will then go ahead and take advantage of those opportunities. But Repair also includes, folks of other racial backgrounds, including many wonderful Black African-American people that I've been learning from. And I guess they would have to speak for themselves as to what they look for out of Repair. I think that, to some extent, they probably view their role as, in part, educating people like me who need the education. And so it's an interesting dynamic, and I think it's been a healthy relationship in the sense that we look to the Black members of our organizing committee and actually other Black attendees of Repair who are not necessarily part of that committee. We look to them as leaders because they understand racism in a way that a white person probably never ultimately can. So we do look to learn from them. By the same token, though, we try very hard not to put them in the position of, okay, you teach us, we'll sit at your feet, and we'll look to you to tell us what to do, because that's an unfair burden to put on anyone. They shouldn't be in the position of having to educate and lead us. We need to do the work on ourselves. So I think we've found a path of mutual respect and mutual support. And someone like Dennis Parker, who's a member of our organizing committee, a person from whom I personally have learned so much, a brilliant attorney who formerly headed the racial justice program for the ACLU, and who now is executive director of an organization called the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. I think Dennis is an example of the kind of Black leader who has contributed so much to Repair as an educator for all the rest of us, because he's an expert on so many issues of systemic racism and the ways in which they get played out in our society. So we've learned so much from him. But by the same token, I think he finds that dialogue with all the rest of us helps him to understand even more what some of the barriers are that he has to push against. And in the organizations that he's worked for, he has connected them with Repair so that our members can be supportive of that work. So I think everybody is probably getting somewhat different things out of it, based on our own backgrounds and where we each are in this journey toward better place.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say really is that it's not just about once the organization is formed, then what we need to do is network with other organizations, right, who are doing similar work. And even if it's not the same work, it's complementary work with the same goal of elevating voices that are not heard, right? So Eugene and I know are doing our work to try to connect with different organizations now and just say, okay, we have this platform of people, maybe you can come speak about your organization, maybe you can share our platform on your website, that type of thing. I think a lot of times people sometimes feel like they started an organization and they're in that organization and then that's good enough. And I think that a lot of times we need to remember that we need to go outside of ourselves in a place that's not particularly comfortable to connect with people who we may not know and may not think exactly the same as we think, but that's what this is kind of all about. I certainly do know, though, that when I've come to your meetings, Karl, that it is, as you say, an inclusive, safe, and courageous space for people to share what's going on. I remember in particular right after Donald Trump's election, and we all came together, and there was so much vulnerability in that room. So I knew then that you were doing real great work. I'm wondering, because I want to not take
I'm going to jump in
longer without opening.
Sure. I'm going to jump in just quickly and echo what you said about organizations making connections and networking with one another. That's been one of the most powerful things for us at Repair. We've had folks come a number of times, for example, from Community Voices Heard, which works in Westchester, largely in the Hispanic, Latino immigrant community, working on things like labor rights, educational programs, making sure that people are not discriminated against in housing, and of course protecting them against deportation. So that's been one group that we've learned a lot from. We've recently made a very strong connection with Historic Hudson Valley, which comes at this whole issue from a very different direction. They are a nonprofit organization that runs some of the most historic tourist sites in the in the Hudson Valley. And one of the fascinating things that they've done over the last decade is they made Phillipsburg Manor one of their flagship tourist sites that tourists and school groups constantly go to visit to learn about life in colonial days in Westchester County. They've turned that into the first major historic site in the North to focus primarily on the story of slavery, because unbeknownst to most of the people who used to visit Phillipsburg Manor in the past, unbeknownst to them, much of the work at Phillipsburg Manor was done by enslaved people. And a decade or so ago, the historians at Historic Hudson Valley said, you know, it's time that we acknowledge this and we totally change our programming so that it becomes an educational place where people can come and understand what slavery in the North was really all about. And so Historic Hudson Valley has now become a partner of ours, and they've come and helped educate the members of Repair about the racial history of Westchester County, which is a deep topic that a lot of us, again, knew little or nothing about, but which continues to have an influence on us today. So yeah, working with these other groups they're a tremendous resource for us, and we try to be a resource for them as well.
Yeah, well, that what you said about the work being done by enslaved persons, that is true of most of the historic sites across this country. So this is part of the work that there is to do to actually begin networking and begin to make this known.
Yeah.
I don't want to delay too much longer before we turn it over to Q&A. And I can tell in the chat, you really started a conversation about this privilege exercise, which is a wonderful exercise. But before we do that, I want to find out a couple of things. What are the most important things that you want us to take away from this conversation today? Is there a call to action that you have for us? What are some of the things that we can do as individuals to follow in your footsteps or start our own movement? What is it that you'd like us to take away today?
Well, I do think that a lot of communities could probably benefit from following the model that we kind of, sort of semi-accidentally stumbled upon with Repair, which is just to bring together groups of people and try to make them as diverse as possible, and then create that safe space. In our case, it's religiously based, but it certainly doesn't have to be. It could be just a community group. I've actually had a couple of people from other backgrounds come to me. For example, one Jewish leader here in Westchester came to me and said, I'm learning from Repair, and we're going to try starting a similar group with a number of different Jewish congregations, Jewish synagogues, but banding together so we can meet regularly and begin making this part of our growth experience. So, and I know, on a community level, a lot of community groups are trying to do something similar to what Repair does. And the fact that we've made it an ongoing commitment, realizing it's not a matter of just 3 or 4 meetings and then sort of patting ourselves on the back and saying, well, the work is done. That has turned out to be quite important for us, because yes, the world does keep changing and the challenges keep changing. And so having an ongoing group of people who are getting to know one another and are getting a deeper and deeper sense of trust and commitment to one another gives us a platform where we can address those changes. So you talked about when Donald Trump was elected president. So for many of us, that was a moment when we felt deeply traumatized. And so we had actually one of our largest meetings. We just opened up the church and said, everybody come. And we didn't even have an agenda. We just said, let's just all talk. And people just took turns standing up and giving their reactions. And that was a moment when I got one of my deepest educational lessons about race from Dennis Parker, whom I mentioned earlier, because halfway through that meeting, many of the white folks had gotten up and talked about how they were so shocked and amazed that in this day and age that a man like Donald Trump could be elected president. And after hearing, a dozen people offer that message, Dennis Parker got up and said, well, I hate to say this, but those of us in the room who are Black, we're not shocked and we're not surprised. We've been seeing this country from a different perspective for all these years. And it was pretty clear to us that Donald Trump had a great chance of being elected president. So first of all of you white friends of ours, you're going to need to start rethinking some of your assumptions about what this country really is. And secondly, please start getting on the phone with your cousins and your aunts and uncles and your friends here in Westchester, but also all over the country, and start talking to them about the things that you're learning here at Repair, because it's very nice for us to sit together in a room once a month and become woke. But now that you see what this country is capable of doing, you white folks are going to have to start doing some of the heavy lifting that we black folks have been trying to do for all these years. And I'm paraphrasing Dennis's message, but his words carried such conviction for me. I'll always forever be grateful for Dennis, because that was kind of a big leap forward for me. And I feel a little embarrassed now, because I sort of feel like, Lane and Eugene, you're probably thinking, well, that just goes to show how dumb Karl Weber was at that point. And that's true. But boy, when you need to learn a lesson, to have a friend like that who will share it with you, and then you can start building on that lesson, is tremendously important. So I guess my message is the power of bringing people of different backgrounds together and setting up guidelines so that they can talk really frankly about their experiences and about what they have learned from living in this society, and what we need to do to make it the society we want it to be. The value of bringing people together and making that dialogue possible is greater than you might think. It means a lot. Yes, it's just talk, and yet it can start some real rethinking and some changing of attitudes and actions.
Thank you. I have lots of questions. I want to turn this over to Eugene, but I do have, I wanted to find out if you have any reflections on how to have people feel safe in these difficult and courageous conversations, right? That Dennis could stand up, but see, Dennis is somebody that he had a lot of background, and he already had the knowledge that, he was committed. What is your thought about helping people to feel safe in these conversations? And then Eugene, after Karl answers this question, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of things that are necessary. One is that, the fact that we're a faith-based organization probably helps. Heaven knows there are reasons why some people actually distrust and fear churches, and can't blame them because there have been abuses that churches have been guilty of, whether it's racially or in other ways. But on the other hand, I think a church does have a reputation as being a place that at least we're aspiring to represent God's love in the world. So the fact that we're sponsored by churches, I think that gives some people at least a certain degree of comfort. We have a series of rules that govern our conversations in our meetings, involving a lot of basic things like, speak to be heard and to understand, not to convince. Don't hog the floor. Make sure everybody has a chance to talk. A lot of sort of simple principles that apply to civil understanding communication, as opposed to debate. Okay, when it's not about trying to score points or trying to prove that you're right. It's about actually listening. And one of our rules that Torcy Judkins recently suggested that we add, and which we're now using, is just say it. And if you realize that what you've said has been awkward, because sometimes you'll say something and on reflection you realize, there's kind of a racist assumption built into that statement. If you realize you've done that, then just apologize and move on. It's not about beating ourselves up with guilt either about our own failings, because we all have those. So I think just inculcating those attitudes and reminding, we begin every meeting by going through those rules and saying, does everyone understand these rules and you're all willing to live by them? And invariably people I think take some comfort from those rules. And there's some other little things that we do. We make it very clear that our leadership is multiracial, and We make sure that the discussions are led by a mixture of people of, of different backgrounds, male and female, young and old, so that there's not an implicit message of, oh, well, one group is really in charge here. And other little subtle things. Sometimes when we have an author, for example, come and give a talk, sometimes we will record the author's presentation, but then we turn off the cameras and we announce we are turning off the cameras when we begin the Q&A, so that people in the audience who might want to talk about some personal experience, growing up in the South or in the Bronx, or something embarrassing that happened to them at their church or at their work, can feel free to do that, knowing that it's not going to be repeated elsewhere. So there are lots of sort of little things that we do that are all built around that message of we're here to respect and care for one another, and you can feel safe saying things that may be painful or difficult or awkward.
Whew. Karl, thank you. Thank you so very much. Man, the chat room is active today.
I see there's a lot there, and I've been so busy engaging with you all that I haven't even had a chance to look. So
that's what you're supposed to do.
Share some of them.
So let me just give the instructions real fast on the Q&A, and then I have something to say about creating a safe space and a brave space, because you hear me say that at the beginning, creating a safe and brave space. For the Q&A, if you want to, you have a question and a comment. First of all, you want to keep your question question or comment to a minute or less, because we have a lot of people online and may want to ask questions. So when you want to ask a question, you want to raise your hand, you want to take your cursor all the way down to the bottom of your page, go all the way to the right-hand side, click reactions, and you will see the button there that says raise hand. And then I keep a tally, I keep a list of who raised their hand first. Then if you don't have the reactions at the bottom of your page, go to the participant button, which is the second from the left. Click on that, find your name. The names are in alphabetical order, first name. Find that and then click on your name, or go to the dots on the right-hand side, and there should be a way for you to raise your hand there. All righty. I know Jason's going to be up. I see you there, Jason. So just really fast on this, creating a safe space. It's an interesting thing, right? Because from my experiences, and I facilitate a lot of things and have over the years, and creating a safe space, it really, in order for me to feel safe, I have to feel safe within myself. Karl, some of the things that you said and what you do, and they're really great things. And if I come there and I can still say, well, but I don't feel safe, right? So we have to really remember, yes, let's continue to create a safe space, and let's continue to create a brave space, meaning creating that space where it's safe, where the person feels brave enough to speak up. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. Whew, man. The chat line has been blowing up on that privilege walk. You dropped that little nugget, and that's what the chat line has been about most of the time. So I want to just go ahead and start going to the questions, and we have first Jason and then Amber.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene and Karl. And I put up my hand first because I think I'm the person who kind of started off that big explosion in the chat about.
It was great. It was great. Thank you.
The talk. Yeah, I'm not feeling badly about it. I think it's actually a great conversation.
It is.
And what happened in our organization, and there are several of us here from that organization, the Human Awareness Institute, is that we ran that exercise about 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And what happened in that exercise that day was that, the usual split happened with some people way at the front and some people way at the back. And the person who was farthest back was an Asian man who found that particular exercise to be excruciating. Mm. And 7 years later, like my partner Marcy just said, she just had a conversation with him, and he's still talking about how much pain was there for him that day. And so the question I posed in the chat was, if Well, first, have other people had that experience in running that exercise? And at least one other person said, yeah, that happened in an exercise I ran. It feels like the benefits accrue to the white people who are having their privilege illuminated, and the pain is being experienced by the people with less privilege in the room, or at least for some people. I don't want to speak for everybody. And I know you can't always protect everybody from their pain, and that a lot of that pain is already there. I think in this case, what happened for this person, because I've talked with him a lot about it, is that he hadn't really completely realized how disparate people's experience of life had been and how different it had been for him. And so anyway, the question I'm in is, I think the exercise is tremendously valuable. I don't think, people should not do it, but I wonder if there's a way to mitigate that so that the pain is not accruing to the people with less privilege while the benefits are accruing to the people with more privilege. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, boy, thank you for sharing that story. As I recall from when we did that exercise at Repair, I don't recall any of the participants sharing or appearing to have been emotionally distressed, thankfully, because that would have been a tough thing to cope with. I will say, I will talk a little bit about that particular experience, and then offer maybe a partial response to your question about how to do this well. We included the privilege walk exercise, which I had not been familiar with before. We included it in our Lenten conversations about race, at the suggestion actually of a young woman who was a community organizer at that time, who happens to be my daughter-in-law. Her name is Janae. She's African-American. And she, as I say, she's a community organizer. And she said, well, this privilege walk exercise, I think you folks will find it to be, very eye-opening. One of the other suggestions she made for the program that she helped to lead was, be sure to have several boxes of Kleenex around the room, because we're going to be doing some stuff that is going to bring up painful memories and thoughts for people, and you're going to need to be prepared for that. I don't remember the Kleenex getting used quite as much as Janae expected, but I bet she had experiences like the one, Jason, that you've described in mind. I guess I would say two quick things. I apologize for talking for a while, but two quick responses. One is, I would say, I think an exercise like that is something that does need to be done with tremendous care and gentleness and sensitivity. And I know it's been written about quite a bit. There are a lot of sort of manuals and so forth that you can find online about how to do this kind of activity. And probably those would have some good tips about how to do it in a sensitive way so that you are not, hurting people needlessly. The other thing, I guess, that I wonder is, in terms of your Asian friend, is it possible for someone like him to look on the exercise as having been educational for him, in the sense that maybe some of the problems that he's had in life, the disappointments, the indignities, the things that he might have perceived as personal failures, perhaps going through an exercise like that could, in a sense, be comforting, in that it could say to him, well, if you felt as though the world has been up against you, or that you haven't been able to make your way as successfully as some other people, maybe it's not you. Maybe the world has played a significant role in holding you back, and maybe that could be somewhat reassuring to a person, that it's not a personal failing on their part. I mean, again, it's easy for me to say, I'm not in your friend's shoes. So, but that is a thought that occurs to me. I don't know, Jason, is that at all responsive to your question?
Yeah, well, sure. I feel like you're being responsive. I don't know that there is an answer to this question, right? It may just be that, yes, this exercise has some peril that comes with it. This was led by skilled facilitators. It's not like it happened, at random, but, I think it was done probably, pretty well. And nonetheless, I was surprised at the depth of pain that at least one person experienced. And so, as a facilitator of groups myself, one of the things I always look for is, what can I learn from this? Okay, so this happened, this person had a lot of pain. How could I do it better next time? And I don't know that there's an answer, but I certainly want to be in the question about it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's such an important point, that yes, when we delve into these areas where we're talking about deep pain and difficult conversations, we have to really be prepared for deep pain and difficult conversations. And so having some, trained folks on hand is very helpful and important.
Thank you.
Eugene, I just want to say, please, that that yes, it's important to prepare people when you're doing an exercise for that is emotional. And as we know, anytime we're talking about topics like racism and so forth, it is deeply painful, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people stay away from these conversations,
Right.
because they feel the pain and they don't want to go there. We are all available, when we're in conversations like this, when we're in exercises like that. One of the great things that I've noticed is that there is great vulnerability, and that the opportunity for the learning and the growth is tremendous. And to just tell people this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for growth, and it may be painful. I wanted to say, and thanks for that, starting the thread there, Jason. I put the link to a PDF for people who want to understand a little bit more about some of the questions that might be asked in the privilege walk exercise. I put a link in the chat, and I'll put it in again before we leave this afternoon. And that's all I wanted to say about that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lane. Oh, God, I put my head down and more people jumped on, but I know who's next. That would be Tyrone. And then we have Seja, Robert, and then we'll keep going. Tyrone?
Good morning, family. So I have to take my hat off to about 3 people on this call, and Jason is one of them, Ann is another. I'm sorry to call you guys out, but you're just awesome. Marcy. All 3 of these people are just phenomenal facilitators in the Human Awareness Institute. So I want to start off with that. But in terms of, and you guys, I love you so much, but in terms of our Asian brothers' experience, and I'm the one who put in there, you can't protect him from pain. And I hope that wasn't insensitive, because I do feel like if someone's still feeling trauma 7 years after an experience, I highly recommend that that you use the skills that you gained here and have a conversation with him and help him process through it. I mean, maybe 7 years ago you wouldn't think you were even qualified to do that. I suggest today you do have those skills, and if you think you don't, then let him talk to Felicia. But my point is that I think you do have what's necessary now. Are you at least on the right road to that? And so think about what's the challenge for you to have a conversation with him, because his pain is going to be his pain. That's one. Secondly, he may have thought he was white. A lot of Asian friends I know think they're white. And he was in shock to find out, whoa, he's not quite as privileged as he thought he was.
That's possible.
So that's another side of it. Again, you can't control that. You don't have anything to fix that with. This is not fixable. So I just hope that as we move forward, that even though I do think it needs to be a safe place, Karl, to your point, it needs to be a safe place for everyone. Just like this call is, it needs to be courageous conversations, and no doubt about that. But in terms of his particular experience and how to move forward on this, I think it's worth that. If you got 50 people in a room and 49 of them have a wake-up call, I hate to hear that person have that one pain, but that pain has to be processed, just like denial has to be processed. It has to be looked at from another perspective. So that's what I wanted to add it to. And I say that with all deep respect to my people from the Human Awareness Institute.
Thank you, Tyrone.
You're welcome.
Seja.
Hi, you bring up a lot of awarenesses of mine throughout my life of little movements forward in this area. As an Episcopalian at one time, I was involved with a class based on the book called Edge of Adventure, and ended up leading many more of those classes at that point. But all of these are steps, and I'm very aware that change for me and for many people I've worked with happens on a heart and a gut level, not on the head level. And so the invitation is there often, but the shift happens more deeply. And we just need to be there and let it happen, be present for them. One of the most powerful experiences I had in going back to school many times was an English writing class or English literature class where there were short stories, not fiction, nonfiction, of one in particular of a young boy who walked out in the woods to play in perhaps Georgia or something like that, and came across the body of a man burnt and hanging from a tree. And I think later in that same story, he says that as an adult, even in a big city like New York or something, he could not sit in a restaurant, for example, with his back to the door because he had learned as a child he didn't know who to trust. Mm-hmm. And that was so powerful. And I needed to hear that story. Mm-hmm. And I think that telling it or having an opportunity, for example, I belong to a group called Philosophy Plus, and maybe doing an exercise where you pass out slips with different fictions or nonfiction stories like that around, and just even though it isn't their own story, it's somebody's own story, and having people slowly read them out loud without necessarily comment can be heart-changing and gut-changing. And so I just wanted to put that out there. We are a group that just, various extent is open for whatever comes up, I guess. So, but I just want to encourage you to stick with the things when you're thinking in terms of change, that the heart and the gut are going to be participating in. My mind can get in the way and explain all sorts of things, but my heart and my gut cannot.
Yes. Yes, actually, thank you so much for sharing that. And your point about the power of stories to open our hearts and to connect with us in a way that goes much deeper than intellect that's such an important lesson. And it's one that at Repair, we really try to live by. One of the things I think back to over the years is many of the stories that individuals have shared with us that have deepened my understanding of how our world works, and it deepened my sense of empathy for people. Two quick examples was when we heard from Father Pedro Sabuni, who is an Episcopal priest, canon in the Diocese of New York, who came to America from Uganda. And he said that until he came to United States, he did not know that he was Black. And then he explained the experiences that helped him to realize that once he came to America, which included, for example, the day after he was ordained as an Episcopal priest, he was driving home to Westchester from the cathedral in New York City when the police stopped him on some pretext, handcuffed him, and dragged him into the police station. And only when the Bishop of New York intervened did they realize, oh, I guess we picked on the wrong guy, and they let him go. And then on the other side of the coin was a good friend of mine from here at St. Barnabas, lovely white man in the computer security field, who talked about what it meant to him when he learned that his alma mater, Georgetown University, had profited enormously from a sale of enslaved people. And the ways in which that shook up his understanding of himself, his school, his background, and his place in the world. So you hear stories like that, one from a very accomplished Black leader, another from a very accomplished white man, and you learn something about our world in a way that as you say, goes much deeper than just what our brains can absorb. It goes to the heart.
Yeah. Thank you, Karl. We have Robert, Adine, and then Marcy, and then Leah. Robert?
Okay, unmuted myself.
There you go.
Okay, so thank you for what you bring today. I want to try to keep this. So I hold talk about race and racism and race privilege in particular as being an intimate, actually very intimate conversation if you're having it with somebody on the other side of the privilege gap.
Mm.
So if that's true, or to the degree that's true, I was very impressed with the fact that you guys had mixed leadership, because in my experience, when the leadership includes people on both sides of the privilege gap, it makes a real difference, especially if the person that's in the downside, the oppressed side, if they're outspoken, and there are people, that's you, Ann Watts, that speak up loudly, but others in that kind of context. So I was wondering, so my question is, and it made people feel safe in a very significant way, both on both sides. So my question is, you said that your group has mixed leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how did you recruit for that? How did you create that mixed leadership? Because, I mean, one thing that may have happened for the Chinese or Chinese American man who was so devastated is that there was no one from that background, not even a helper of some sort, who could sort of step in and say, oh yeah, from an Asian background, we experience, we have our own ways of coping with oppression and being ourselves, and that the reflection sometimes is extremely empowering, or just the insight that they can provide. So how'd you do that? How do you do that?
Well, when we started Repair, the part of the core leadership was the 5 priests, actually 4 priests, because 2 of the churches in Ossining share 1 priest. So we had 4 priests who were among the leaders of the sponsored churches, one of whom happened to be, at that time, a brilliant Black woman, Yejide Peters, who's a scholar, a social science scholar, as well as being a wonderful priest. So there was a certain amount of diversity built into the leadership group just because of Yejide's presence there. And because we knew we were going to be having conversations about race, we deliberately said, well, let's create a diverse organizing board. And so we each had roots in the 5 churches, the 5 parishes that were sponsoring Repair. And so we just cast our mind around to people who were leaders within the congregation and made sure that half to a third of the people that we recruited for the organizing board were people of color. Women, as I say, women as well as men, and people from differing kinds of backgrounds, not all, lawyers like Dennis Parker, but, educators, homemakers, people in business, all types of folks. And there's been turnover in the leadership since then. And so we're constantly looking around for who's someone else who we know who is, smart and engaged and outspoken and knowledgeable and comes from a background that maybe we need to add to our committee. And so we're always looking to recruit the right kind of people. Up to this point, our organizing committee is all folks from the 5 churches. And I think that will probably continue to be the case. So that limits it a bit, but since we, as I say, we have roots in those churches, we're able to sort of find and identify people. And we definitely make a conscious effort to keep that, to keep it as mixed as possible and have strong voices representing different perspectives.
Thank you very much, Karl. We have Adine.
Karl, it's so good to see you again. Thank you.
Yes, hi, Adine.
Thank you so much. It's very good. I have three short points to make. First thing on safety. when we talk about safety in these discussions, we're really talking about whites feeling safe in these discussions. But I want to say one thing. For most African Americans, you lose that safety when you step outside of your house.
Mhm.
And if the police are feeling particularly aggressive, you may not even have that safety within your house.
Mhm.
And this is a reality of our lives.
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to say is if you could speak a bit, I know a little bit about Irvington, speak about the history of slavery in Irvington and what your town is doing
Mhm.
in some very admirable ways to heighten awareness of the slavery which existed during the colonial period.
Yeah.
And then if you have a moment, talk about the need for affordable housing.
Mm.
What wealthy river towns are safe for whites because housing keeps non-whites out.
Right, right. Wow, those are those are great comments and great questions, and we could, have a whole program about that. And at Repair, we've had programs about these topics, which are so interesting. So yeah, Irvington did have enslaved people about whom a certain amount is known. The Irvington Historical Society, over the last few years, or a couple of leaders there in particular, have taken it upon themselves to research deeply into the story of slavery in Irvington, and they have come up with the names. I think in most cases, only the first names of several people who were enslaved workers in Irvington. And they're now in the process, I think they're nearly through the process of raising funds for what is going to be a beautiful memorial on Main Street next to the War Memorial and other memorials to the enslaved people who helped to create the wealth of Irvington. So we are doing that. It's been interesting to see the reaction of the town. I think most people in the town, including the mayor and the town board, are very supportive. And they said, yes, this is long overdue. We're glad we're making this reckoning and at least beginning to understand the contributions that enslaved people made, unwillingly to building our community. And it's time that we did this. Soon after the memorial was announced, someone proposed, we haven't done enough, and I'm paraphrasing now, but the proposal was apparently something along the lines of, well, we haven't done enough to recognize the founding families of Irvington, who have, a number of streets named after them. And these are families which enslaved people. And so this person went to the town board and said, let's allocate some money to put brass plaques into the street corners all along Main Street, honoring the names of these families. And so the people from the Historical Society who'd been working on the enslavement project said, well, if you're going to do that, be sure to put at the bottom of each plaque, this person enslaved people. Ooh. And that, you can imagine, that caused some controversy in which many of us sort of got involved. And in the end, what the town has most recently decided is forget the plaques. We don't need to do this. Their names are already on the street signs. But it was sort of clearly a reaction like, oh, well, if you're going to honor the enslaved people, well, we'll one up you and we'll honor the enslaved people. What do you think about that? So it just goes to show how alive the emotions connected with these issues still are on both sides, which is, kind of scary and disturbing. I think that's what you're referring to, right?
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. What was the last question that you asked? Because
I asked about affordable housing.
Oh yeah. Well, again, that's something we've talked about a fair amount at Repair. It's not something that a group like ours can personally fix, obviously, but it's something that comes up over and over again. And right now it comes up in these controversies, related to zoning, for example, which it's sort of like one project at a time is where these battles get fought. And so right now, Mary Jo, I know my wife, she's listening. You may know the latest about this, and if you do, you can chime in. But I understand that there is a housing development being considered by the local board, and there's a controversy over how many of the units are going to be affordable and how affordability will be defined. And I have to say, I think for the first time, there's a significant number of people in the town who are saying, we support this and we want affordable housing because we want Irvington to become a welcoming place for all kinds of people. You actually see people writing letters to the editor in the local paper saying this, and going on Facebook and saying this. Now there's still the old guard saying, oh, but what about traffic? What about the nature of the community? We don't want to harm the beautiful historic quality of our town, which is, unfortunately for many people, code language. That really means, we don't want people who aren't our kind coming in. But it seems as though there's a stronger pushback against that kind of sentiment than there was in the past. I think more people are actually willing to put their money where their mouth is and take the chance that their community is going to change and maybe their housing values will be affected. Although, I think the evidence shows that there's not going to be a negative effect. But, that's the appeal, is always to people's pocketbooks, oh, be very afraid of these Black and brown people because it's going to cost you money. And I think that appeal we're slowly wearing down the power of that appeal. And I hope I'm right. I hope we can keep the pressure and moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All righty. Before Marcy and Leah, I want to just say something real fast. So last week, Lane and I had the opportunity to speak with One Spirit. It was called the Gathering, and the topic was, what's yours to do? And one of the things that we said, how do we find out what's yours to do, what's mine to do, is what breaks your heart, right? What breaks your heart? And I bring that up because there's a lot of conversation in the chat, right now, where people are feeling this pain. Right. So, and your heart is breaking, so to speak. So we can use that as an impetus to get clear. Okay, so this hurts my heart. So what's mine to do? How can I get involved? Or just wanted to bring that out there to have us always continue to thinking towards how can I be a part of the solution. Mm-hmm. Marcy?
Thank you, Eugene and Lane and Dr. Weber. I really appreciate having a moment. What you just said, Eugene, is like perfect. I've been watching the chat, and it's been hard to watch the chat and listen at the same time. There's so much intensity and desire to make a difference there.
It's good stuff going on.
Yeah. And Jason spoke to the exercise that we did in our organization, and also Tyrone, and I just wanted to lift up, actually, Adine, I always love what you have to say, and you always say, I have these points, and I have a couple points, and I like that perspective. When someone's in trauma, we don't always know. Every time we lead anything, and I think any organization needs to be trauma informed of what trauma might show up like. And it can be freeze, it can be flee, it can be fight, it can be fawn, there's other things. And I believe the situation that we talked about was a freeze situation. And it's almost impossible to tell when someone's in freeze unless you're right present to them. And I also want to say that particular day, it was a whole workshop, and it was a 2-day thing, and there was conversations, and this person did have a chance to speak their feelings. But what's really coming up for me, which is interesting, is like we have so many words, and I'm a really body-centered person, and embodiment is one of the ways that people can learn different from hearing words. And I wrote in the chat, and I don't always type well. It takes me too long to type it out. But if that exercise, I'm just going to go there, was arranged so that the people that didn't have as much privilege actually ended up to be the core in the center of a circle, and were surrounded by love, by compassion, by understanding, it might not leave people in as much upset. There's going to be upset because if they haven't been aware of their privilege, that's possible. But to have that exercise so that the people without less privilege are at the back of the room by themselves, that in and of itself is excruciating, to have the body experience of being separate instead of just the intellectual experience. So I had those points, and also just appreciate the passion in the chat particularly, and your passion, actually, Dr. Weber, all of you, Lane and Eugene. I really appreciate that we keep showing up, and you keep showing up, and we keep showing up, and it teaches me every time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Although I'll just say, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not a doctor, just plain old Mr. Weber, or you got a call.
Plain old Mr. Weber. Well, the church I went to as a little kid had a Dr. Weber, so it just popped right out of my mouth.
It comes naturally to you. Yeah.
It does indeed. Thank you, Carl. How about that?
Thanks, Marcy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marcy. One of the things that you said, and I want to just reiterate what you said, is let's all keep showing up. Keep showing up.
Yeah.
Leah, we will make you the last question of the day.
Okay. Thank you, plain old Carl. I went to I think only one repair meeting last winter during Executive Order 203 when we were doing police reform, and Kenneth Chamberlain was there speaking, whose father was murdered by police.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that meeting, and I really appreciate what you're saying and what you're trying to do. I think it's great. And I love learning that repair is from the Jewish philosophy of repairing the world. And also noticing that you wrote a book on creating a world without poverty really strikes me, because I'm in the Poor People's Campaign. And what you talked about, networking and joining other similar organizations, is what I'm really doing right now. And what I find is that I don't have time for my church anymore, because, and I find that I believe that spiritual leaders really need to take charge on anti-racism and furthering this within their congregations. And my church is not really as vocal as I'd like, or as active as I'd like. And these other organizations are taking place of my church. I wonder what you had to say about that. And meanwhile, since I have the floor, I'm going to make a slight plug for a rally the Poor People's Campaign is doing in Mount Vernon on the 17th. They're partnering with the New York Nurses Association, as well as a coalition of residents, to protest the closing of a hospital there. It's very sad, and the community really needs a hospital, but Montefiore is a profiteering entity, and they are disinvesting from the community of Mount Vernon, which is primarily a Black community. So we'll be there at about noon, and I invite you all to join me. And if you want, I'll put my email in the chat if you want more information. I'll have a flyer soon. So thank you. And just wondering what you thought about leaving my church.
Well, yeah. First, actually, I wanted to say, thank you, Leah. I wanted to say thanks for working with the Poor People's Campaign. It's something that many of us in repair are so supportive of. A group of us actually went down to Washington a couple of years ago for the big rally with Reverend Barber. That was a great experience, and we carried a repair banner. It was cool. But so what you're doing is so in line with what we seek to do. So I totally understand what you're saying about leaving the church, and I guess feeling a sense of disappointment that they're not taking a stronger position against racism. And obviously, very personal decision, and a lot is going to depend on the nature of that church that you happen to worship at. Every church has a different character, depends largely on leadership. The right priest or minister can make a huge difference in getting a congregation to understand how their faith and their social relationships need to be in sync. In the absence of that kind of leadership, then lay people have to step up and do that. Sometimes they have to educate the priests. But if you're not getting the nourishment that you need at your church, then certainly I understand, the feeling of kind of drifting away and finding the nourishment and the excitement and the passion elsewhere. Personally, I would try to avoid that myself, just because there are things where spiritually I really need the nourishment of the church. It's been very tough during COVID to not be able to receive communion, to get the bread and the wine every week. Was always such a high point of my week that's been something that I really feel as though I've been kind of in a desert since COVID and have been unable to partake in that. So, I'm hoping and praying that will end at some point. If I ever got to the point where I felt I found myself worshiping in a parish church where the awareness of racism and the need to fight against it was totally absent, and where people were turning a deaf ear to that message, then I would just have to find another church. I think that's what I personally would end up doing, rather than leaving the church altogether, because over the years it has become that important to me. But it's very much a personal decision. Just the one thing, as an activist, of course, I'm sure you people have told you this, but as an activist, don't forget about the importance of self nurture and making time for yourself, and giving yourself the physical and emotional and spiritual and personal resources that you need to take care of yourself, because if you don't do that, then you won't be able to help others. And it's a cliche, but it's very true, and sometimes people need to be reminded. So I throw that out there in case it's helpful.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Leaving the church or leading the way? I don't know. I want to thank everybody who asked questions. Again, I so appreciate the conversation in the chat. Very, very powerful stuff, right? What breaks our heart is what leads us to do what is ours to do. It helps us to find what's ours to do. And so keep showing up, keep showing up. Lane and I appreciate you showing up here every week. And for the new ones who are here today, keep showing up. Be a friend and tell a friend. Lane?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, everyone. And we have some announcements. What I wanted to do, though, before I get to those, just say the talk about the importance of this burgeoning awareness and how there is always more for us to discover. See, no matter how much we think we know about how it is for someone else, actually, there is more. And so I want to keep encouraging people to look for opportunities to participate in an Undoing Racism workshop. Extraordinarily good work. I myself, what we find when people do the Undoing Racism workshop is they actually get more in touch with what is theirs to do. That is what has me making this announcement right now. And actually, it will build a fire under your fanny. You will feel more empowered to take action, because that's the level of awareness that this work happens on. So I encourage you, please continue to look for an Undoing Racism workshop. If you can't find that, you can also find Getting to the Root. That is also an Undoing Racism workshop, Getting to the Root. And these are done online. And so please keep looking for these opportunities. Well worth the investment. Well worth the investment. As you know, we've had several folks who lead the Undoing Racism workshop as panelists and speakers, And we will continue to do that because that work is so important. We wanted to say that The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain is live in theaters and available to stream on September 17th. You will remember that Mr. Chamberlain's son, Kenneth Chamberlain Jr., was a guest on our show. And Kenneth Sr. was a 60-something-year-old ex-Marine who was killed by police who entered his property in the middle of the night without cause. And the newly elected DA of the county where the killing occurred has now reopened the case, but the family has never given up. And the movie has been praised as a must-see by critics. So we are planning to host a watch party, but we haven't worked out the details. So we urge you to look up the movie, please, for yourself and see where you can view it on your own. So The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, starring Frankie Faison. Please look for that. We plan to have Mr. Chamberlain for an upcoming Race Talk panel to speak about the push to eliminate qualified immunity for police officers that is currently still upheld in all states, I believe, except for Colorado, where the ACLU was successful in pushing through a reform bill. And so we hope to have a representative of the ACLU on the panel as well. So of course, we'll keep you informed about that. Next week, our guest speaker will be award-winning sculptor Vinnie Bagwell, and who is credited with reframing public art to include historic Black images, and whose art can be seen up and down the East Coast. She's passionate about reclaiming the stories of people of color and having their accomplishments acknowledged. And she will speak with us on the topic of art as reparations. She is dynamic. She is not to be messed with, and you do not want to miss that. You see Carl saying yes, and
she's doing our memorial in Irvington, and a wonderful speaker.
Absolutely. I saw her and met with her at that Juneteenth celebration, and she was a showstopper. And thank you, Adine, for putting us together at that event as well. So see, it takes a team. It takes a team. And the name of the movie is The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain. Carl, thank you very much. Do you have 3 more words to say? And then I'm going to turn it back over to Eugene, who's going to talk about our last announcement.
I'll say thank you to everyone. Our first meeting for the program year of repair will be 2 weeks from today, September 22nd. We always meet at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday evening, and we'll be having a discussion about critical race theory, what it really is, why it's so controversial, and how you can be prepared to talk about it when it comes up around the water cooler.
And can we find that at repairrivertowns.org?
Repairrivertowns.org is our website, and we'll have all the details there, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Eugene.
All righty. So I don't know, you guys may have noticed that we have a new Facebook page. So we would love for you to stop by and like our page. It's Race Talk Revolution. And we also gave our YouTube page an uplift. You want to check that out too. As you know, we post recordings of these live sessions on our YouTube page every week. That's also Race Talk Revolution that you'll find on YouTube. So please take some time to visit the pages and become a subscriber, because as we continue to grow, again, your voice matters, right? So as we continue to do this, we get to touch lives, not only here on this platform, but you go out and touch lives, your friends, your families, and they touch lives, and it just keeps growing and spreading. And that will help us to expand these important conversations that we have every week. And don't forget to like your favorite videos on those YouTube pages. All right. And with that, I say thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Karl Weber, who's not a doctor. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lane. It's always a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. And yes, somebody asked if repair was on Eastern time. Yes. Yes. All right. Very good, everyone. Thank you so much. Keep those cards and letters coming. We want to know what you think. We want to give you the shows that you want to see. We want to offer you the conversations you want to participate in. And this is an equal opportunity forum. So
Lane?
please suggest your speakers. Hi,
Lane, before you-
Colleen.
Yeah, hi, before you
Uh-oh,
hang up.
hi.
I look and then don't see the program listed on the Rivertown website, the Repair Rivertown's website. So is it not listed yet?
Carl, it's okay. Carl, unmute.
Yes,
And just-
yes, you caught me out. I'm going to get the listing up there later today.
Colleen
Okay,
is
thank
on
you.
it. Colleen is on it.
All right, everybody.
All right, bye,
And
everybody.
with that,
Okay, bye.
bye-bye. Keeping us honest. Gotta love it. Take care, everyone.